Let's go over some of the common bird orders within Washington State. It gives us a way to organize all the different birds. If you see a bird and you want to know what is that, then it's kind of useful to know where to flip in the field guide if you're using one of those, or even just kind of to orient yourself. So rather than start with a huge list of species, let's start with some of the major groups, some of which look familiar, and most of which we have right here in Washington State. The biggest group by far is the perching birds, and so I put them on their kind of biggest, thickest branch over here. Uh, and they're oddly enough kind of related to falcons, which belong somewhere in the same area as them. Usually falcons are grouped over here with other raptor type birds, but it seems more recent evidence puts them somewhere else. A lot of these groups make a lot of sense, like hawks and eagles and vultures are out here, somewhat related, at least on the same sort of branch as owls. A little more surprising is things like kingfishers and woodpeckers up here that don't seem to have a lot in common. But some groups, like these guys that hang around water all the time and mostly eat fish, make a lot of sense. These large-bodied birds, like game birds and ducks and geese, also kind of make sense. They look vaguely similar. And then others, this one over here is just kind of an odd collection of a variety of birds that seem closely related. And at the base of all this is the dinosaurs, many of which were actually feathered. Um, that's just kind of a biological aside, I suppose, to put things in perspective and what birds are. Let's start off with the songbirds and just talk a little bit about them. Uh, if you see a bird, it's probably a songbird. So that would just be your best guess. It's going to occupy the bulk of the field guide, but is also the biggest, most confusing group. With over 6,500 species, this is a hard group to kind of put your thumb on and say, a songbird looks like this. Well, obviously they sing, thus the name, and they do so with much more talent than most other birds, some of which merely squawk. Uh, they eat a whole variety of things. Some you'll find, like our little junco friend here, on the ground all the time, and others, like the violet green swallow, you'll find doing almost everything in the air, including mating. They have some amazing array of sounds that they make. They range from very small to fairly large, and they're songbirds. Most times they will eat insects for at least part of the year, mainly when they're raising young, and they're bringing those back so they can grow really quickly. So there's the songbird group, and I wanted to mention one other subgroup of songbirds, which is the corvids. And so corvids are crows and ravens and magpies and jays. They're pretty common around here. Really smart birds. Some people have estimated that many of these ravens are as smart as about a 3-year-old human child, which is really pretty remarkable. They have some amazing problem-solving abilities, even the ability to use tools and figure out new stuff. A lot of interesting experiments done on this group of birds. One other kind of quirk that they have is most birds, when they move on the ground, they'll just kind of hop, and some do so really nicely, and others look pretty clunky doing it. Well, this group has the ability to walk one foot in front of the other, kind of like we do, which is not completely unique among the birds, but it's kind of a talent that birds have or they don't. There's a lot of things in this group that kind of go together, and once you start seeing them as a group, some of their behaviors make a little more sense. They're all pretty squawky, they're kind of clever, and always have a gleam in their eye like they're up to something. Falcons are fast-flying little pocket rockets. They are predatory birds out during the daytime. They live a fairly long time and are monogamous. And cruel as it sounds, they typically eat a lot of other birds. So you see this peregrine falcon here with a bird in its talons. They have fairly powerful talons and a hooked beak. Not quite as dramatic as some of the hawks and eagles, but still nonetheless, they are birds of prey. Not very big, like I was saying, little pocket rockets. These kestrel is really no bigger than a pigeon, and it can still take down mice and other birds, but will often take out insects as its main prey. So not big birds, but very agile and fast flyers. I was mentioning that a bit ago. Peregrine falcon known to be one of the fastest animals in the world, and part of that is their wing structure. It's kind of swept back like this, so when they go into a dive, then there's a lot less wind resistance, but also powerful flyers. And so that's the falcons. Another similar group, but with plenty of differences, similar in that they eat meat. The owls are out at night, and boy, a lot of people are just creeped out by owls. I mean, they look very human-like, and part of that is their eye structure, right? They're just staring right at you. Very few birds have eyes that large, and they're huge, which is partly why they have to turn their heads. Uh, Birds are really kind of strange in their skull structure. Their eyes are basically just way oversized, but they need them to see at night. And so they produce these extra structures to hold their eyes in place, but they can't move their eyes like we do, which is partly, I think, why they're so creepy, because they just look like they're staring all the time. So in order to move their eyes, they actually have to move their head from one direction to another. And they can swivel that head all the way around and then even past 180 degrees. Now, they can't go all the way around 360 like some sort of possessed person, but they do have quite an ability that is unique there and kind of hidden because of all this scruffy feathers right here around their neck. If you were to take off all their feathers, they'd look kind of scrawny like any other bird with this sort of long curved neck and a head perched on top. We just don't see that because it's all covered up with feathers, so it looks like it's a head rotating on some sort of turret, which is a little strange for us. Now, they are birds of prey, and so they have really strong talons and a curved beak. And one of their other interesting talents, besides good night vision, is hearing. And that's why they have this weird disc-shaped face that actually helps funnel sound toward their ears, which is often kind of lopsided, one here and one here, but located at different heights on their head, which actually helps them to locate their prey by sound. Done experiments with barn owls in complete darkness inside and found they can pounce on prey with only sound to guide them. So really interesting. They can also fly silently, which you can imagine is a advantage hunting at night for very skittish little rodents, which makes up most of their food. And that's due to their fringed feathers. So they have really big, broad wings, short, stocky body, and yeah, these fringed feathers. Actually, you kind of see it on our spotted owl here. See at the end how they're all fringy, and that helps cut down on the amount of sound that they make as they glide through the air very silently. Also part of, I think, what makes them spooky for a lot of people. They're actually somewhat related to owls, oddly enough, are the woodpeckers. And this is an interesting group. And a lot of times they have this kind of black and white coloration. And if they're going to have any other colors, it's probably red, and usually on the head. And not all woodpeckers are woodpeckers, but they all do peck wood in some way. So we have the pileated woodpecker, which is an actual woodpecker. And then we have sapsuckers that drill these little holes in the wood. But that's certainly the thing that holds them together, is that nice, sharp, stout bill that they use to hammer into wood. And this is quite the ecological service for other birds. These guys do it, sometimes like the sapsuckers, to get their food, which is sap and the insects that come in there, or like these guys to drill into the wood and find insects, which they then lap out with their long tongue that comes out and is actually barbed at the tip to get those insects out, sort of retrieve them with their own built-in spear. Back to the story at hand. When they really drill into wood, they hollow out cavities, and so you'll see usually kind of a square pattern to this, and they'll go all the way and dig inside and make a nest cavity. Really nice, safe place to raise your young, They use it for a year and then build another one the next year. And other birds really depend on these nest cavities for their future homes. And that's an important thing. They are noisy birds. They're not songbirds. They don't sing the same way songbirds do, but they do make some loud sounds. You've probably heard this northern flicker around town. They seem pretty adaptable to urban areas, but you'll find them in the forest as well. And you'll hear them go wika, 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 wika. And a lot of these woodpeckers have similar calls. A couple other weird things. I mean, they're just such a weird bird. I mean, them and owls both have these crazy specializations. And so they're hanging out on these tree trunks all day long. I mean, that's quite a trick. So one thing they do is they prop themselves with a strong tail. They actually use their tail feathers to help them stay on the branch. And then obviously they need to grip that really well. Now, most birds have feet with toes arranged like this, but woodpeckers have two toes in the front and two toes in the back, which helps them hang on a little bit better. One other way you can recognize them, besides their coloration and some of these other details, is if you catch one far off, they have this weird sort of undulating or wave-like flight pattern that pretty much all woodpeckers that I've seen have. And so they'll flap and then glide, sort of coast upwards, then they start falling back down, and then they flap, and then they go up, and they flap and go back up. Kingfishers are interesting birds and fun to watch. They are fishing birds and they dive into the water after their prey. And the rest of the time they're perched up, kind of drying off on a branch somewhere near the water. Now, what I find kind of interesting about these birds is, one, their appearance. They look to me like some sort of mix between a blue jay and a falcon and a woodpecker. And they actually are up there on that same family tree branch along with woodpeckers. So there's some similarity there, but not much for the rest of their lifestyle for sure. I think one of the things that makes them seem so out of place is that most of the members of this group, the Craciformes, actually are old world species, things like bee eaters and other ones we're not really familiar with. So mostly birds from Africa and Asia. And the kingfisher is one of the few new world members of this group. And so an interesting bird. Then we get to the last of that branch I've been on for a bit, all the raptors, and we have the hawks and eagles, very similar to falcons in many ways, but these are big birds. So easy to spot for the most part. Pretty similar in terms of especially these long, broad wings, right? I mean, they just look like airplane wings. And that's probably what inspires that. Again, from the last video, remember their arm is in here and that feathers really extend their wing quite a bit. And so these guys you find soaring all over the place, sometimes really high and other times not so much. We see the red-tailed hawk around here all the time. Osprey as well. And these guys are meat eaters. They have these big talons with, they're very powerful, extremely sharp, and they have a grip that's, I think I read somewhere that the eagle has the grip that's something like 10 times as strong as a human grip. So that's pretty fierce. They have that curved beak and eat meat. A lot of times taking down larger prey, things like rabbits, snakes, quite a few rodents, and prey like that. Some golden eagles will even take out things like baby lambs and small bighorn sheep, things like that, but probably not real common. What else to say about these guys? They're pretty long-lived and form monogamous pairs, sometimes for life. You see this osprey here on this big stick nest. Obviously, they're not going to fit in some tiny little nest or into a tree hole anywhere, and so they need plenty of room. One of the interesting members of this group are the vultures, and they actually have a really good sense of smell. They can even smell bi-directionally. They might say, oh, you know, it smells a little stronger over here, and then they fly off to the left. So one of the few birds with a really good sense of smell. Northern harrier actually has a little overlap with the owl. It has kind of an owl-like face and has a really good sense of hearing. But for the most part, these birds are pretty easy to recognize by their size and their wing shape and kind of what they're doing. So that's our hawks and eagles. Onto a different branch of the bird family tree, we have herons and pelicans and these other large waterfowl. I always find these guys around water. This group taxonomically kind of still under some revisions and some mysteries to solve there. The only one we're really taking on in this class is the great blue heron. Definitely lives around water, but they all have this long beak that's pretty good size. You definitely get that in the pelican. They usually have a long neck. We don't see that on the pelican because it's all kind of curved up as it flies, but they do have a good long neck, really long, broad wings that are, if you looked at them cross section, kind of cupped, so they get a lot of lift out of those. We'll see these herons flying over Yakima a fair bit, just have this slow, relaxed way of beating their wings, and they just look pretty relaxed up there, flying from pond to pond. Most of these guys eat, invertebrates in the water, or frogs, or very often fish. We actually will see sometimes some American white pelicans soaring around Yakima. Usually a group of 20 or 30 of them will be flying over the Yakima River. So look around for that. It's an interesting sight to behold. Another interesting little group includes swifts and hummingbirds. We're just taking on the hummingbird for the purposes of our class, and the rufous hummingbird, but all these are pretty small birds and really deft flyers. I mean, they're really agile in the air. One interesting thing that holds these guys together is their tiny little feet. Aren't they cute? I mean, these legs, just barely anything there. They can use them to perch, but that's about it. And actually, their scientific name basically means legless. So kind of an interesting one there. And they'll eat insects, and obviously the hummingbirds with that long bill can also get into flowers and lap up nectar and have that unique ability to hover. Shorebirds are an interesting group, actually on that same branch as the swifts and hummingbirds, and they're hard to tell apart though. I mean, they're all pretty much like this killdeer, you know, beige on the top or brown and white underneath, and they have these long stilt-like legs, which they run surprisingly quickly with. Uh, they have fairly short, stout, almost squared off beaks that they use to probe around in the muddy sand for insects and other invertebrates. Killdeer's kind of distinctive with some of these bands, but you're not going to find any shorebirds that are red and yellow and blue to tell apart. They all have a pretty similar appearance and have a pretty similar lifestyle. So good luck with those guys. One other interesting bit about these guys is that their wings are fairly long and sort of tapered, and they're really good flyers, even though they're spend a lot of time on the ground looking for insects and whatnot in the soil. They do fly, and kind of makes sense. If they are looking in wet sand for insects and it gets really cold, then or freezes up, then there's no more insects to have, and so they fly off. It's not all of them, but quite a few are really long distance flyers. There's one called the Godwit that was GPS tagged and apparently flew from Alaska down to New Zealand on this little makeshift globe of mine in one flight. And so they do migrate long distances and kind of show up now and again, like our spotted sandpiper over here shows up in the summer to eat and then flies back down south for the winter. Our two last groups, the waterfowl and the game birds, are pretty closely related and look similar. They all have this really big body, sometimes long necks, sometimes not so much, but they're not short like songbird necks. They're pretty good size. All these waterfowl at least the vast majority of them have webbed feet because they just cruise in the water. They're really comfortable on the water surface. They'll dive down underneath sometimes, but that's kind of their safe place to hide. The woodpeckers have their tree hollow cavities, and these guys have the water. And good luck catching them. I mean, these mergansers can swim upstream. I've seen them in the Yakima River in a pretty swift current, just kind of paddling along, looking pretty comfortable. Males and females are pretty different looking most of the time, and they often will nest on the ground, although not always. But usually find these guys around water eating a whole variety of things. And that is our waterfowl. Now, game birds should remind you of chickens. I mean, and this really tells you a lot about them. If you think of kind of even the social structure of chickens, you have a rooster and kind of rules the roost with all the hens around. And all these game birds kind of have the same sort of style. Like I said, they look similar to those waterfowl, really big bodies, shorter necks, and obviously no webbed feet. But these guys spend most of their life on the ground. And they are really good at it. They're really good runners and spend most of their time just pecking around in the soil. Obviously, with a lifestyle like that and as big as they are, they make really good targets for both humans, as you can tell by the name game bird. That is pretty suggestive, but other species as well. And so look at their coloration, I mean, especially the hens, really pretty well camouflaged. You don't want to stand out with a lifestyle like that. Now, they can fly. They're not always great at it. And a lot of times when they take off, there's this huge sound, which can really startle the heck out of you if you're not expecting it. And they'll fly off and kind of glide 100 yards away and then resume their activities. And that's kind of what game birds do. And unlike ducks and geese and some of those other shorebirds, these guys have powerful flight muscles, but they don't use them very much, and so they look different. They're built more for these big bursts of speed rather than long distance flight. And so, a lot of times we just try to appreciate wildlife in this class and not talk about how they taste, but it's instructive here. So, chicken has white meat, so do turkeys, and they belong in this group. And that breast meat is white because it's these powerful muscles that they don't use a whole lot. If you've ever eaten duck or other waterfowl, you'll notice it's really dark. It's because it's really rich with myoglobin and mitochondria to help power those muscles for flight for a long period of time. So some interesting differences there, delving into their physiology. Then the last bit I'll mention is these guys are polygynous, and so you get one rooster going around basically displaying for the females and saying, look at me, aren't I cool? They have these really ridiculous dances and calls that they make to attract the females that find it attractive for whatever reason they do. Who knows why? And then he gets to mate with as many females as are attracted to him, and then, like so many other animals, takes off and leaves the females to raise the young, which they're perfectly capable of doing. But that's a little different than many birds that are very cooperative parents. Well, I hope that helps you get a handle on some of the bird diversity in terms of major groups. And good luck out there spotting birds in the wild.